From the underground bunkers of Natanz to the oil markets of the Gulf, the Middle East is once again caught in the flames of a gamble. One authored not by chance but by design. In a stunning and polarizing move, Israel has launched an unprecedented air assault deep into Iranian territory, targeting nuclear sites and eliminating top military leaders in Operation Rising Lion. The Israeli government says the goal is deterrence, not escalation. But as air raid sirens wail from Tel Aviv to Tehran, the world watches a familiar formula unfold: preemptive strikes, immediate retaliation, and strategic fallout with global consequences. Has Israel shattered the nuclear ceiling or simply cracked the foundations of regional stability? And at the center of it all, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a man hailed by allies as Israel's shield and condemned by critics as the architect of perpetual war. Tonight we unpack the motives, the risks, and the long-term consequences of Israel's most audacious strike yet. Can this act of aggression truly prevent a nuclear Iran, or will it provoke an uncontrollable regional inferno? I'm Hani Saif. Let's get in focus. Welcome back. On June 13th, 2025, Israel rewrote the rules of engagement in the Middle East. With wave after wave of airstrikes, it destroyed key elements of Iran's nuclear infrastructure and assassinated high-ranking military and nuclear figures, including General Mohammad Bagheri and IRGC chief Hussein Salami. The operation, dubbed Rising Lion, aimed to cripple Iran's progress towards acquiring nuclear weapons. In many ways, it succeeded, at least tactically. But The Economist calls it a terrifying gamble, because while it may have delayed Iran's nuclear timetable, it may have also triggered a volatile chain reaction. Iranian proxies are active. Drone and missile attacks have resumed. Gulf states are furious, oil prices are spiking, and perhaps most significantly, diplomatic channels now appear radioactive. According to Israeli intelligence, Iran was weeks away from producing multiple nuclear devices, but American assessments differ, suggesting Tehran's weapons program may not have been reauthorized since 2003. That discrepancy highlights a crucial question: was this operation preemptive defense or preemptive destabilization? Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps Aerospace Force has executed a significant missile strike against Israeli targets, marking one of Iran's most intense retaliatory actions in recent days. This attack, involving Fatah ballistic missiles, demonstrated Iran's capability to penetrate Israeli air defenses, leaving the regime vulnerable. The IRGC asserted that these strikes affirm Iran's dominance over the skies of the occupied territories. And joining us now to focus on the immediate and long-term consequences of this strike is Mr. Meher Nicola, firstly, the director of the EU Asian Centre and former advisor to the World Bank. Welcome, Mr. Firstly, to In Focus. How do you assess the strategic rationale behind Israel's operation? Was it an act of preemptive security or provocation?
It's a very good question. So I think, to make a long story short, I think that Trump is not a neoconservative. So that's the most important starting point. The neoconservatives being people like George W. Bush, Liz Cheney, John McCain, Tony Blair in England. And these guys, the neocons, are really totally aligned with the right wing of the Likud party in Israel, right? I think it's not the case for the Trump White House. I think 90% of the policy planners, strategic thinkers today inside the Trump White House, the Pentagon, the State Department, don't like the neocon worldview. They don't like, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney's blind, complete support to the Israeli right and far right, blah, blah, blah. However, in Gaza, they are giving a free rein to the Israelis. So because America is giving a free rein to the Israelis in Gaza, many commentators, many experts in the Middle East and Europe and Asia are saying, oh, it means that Trump is not different from George W. Bush or Tony Blair. I think they're wrong. I think when it comes to Iran, initially and until now, Trump was not an aggressive policy hawk. His preferred option was to negotiate secretly between Tehran and Washington, and the idea was to keep on negotiating until the end of July, early August, to give a room for maneuver to the Iranian government. And if the Iranian government had accepted to reach a middle-of-the-road deal, I think Trump would have been very happy, in spite of the fact that Trump doesn't like the Khomeinist regime in Iran. But it's not important because Trump is a realist, so he doesn't plan, foreign policy or wars based on what he likes or doesn't like. He's a cold-blooded realist, which is good. And so if the Iranians had made concessions, for example, the main thing which America wanted is a purely civilian nuclear program in Iran. What does it mean? That Iran should tell America, okay, we're going to come clean, and we will allow an inspection regime with American inspectors coming very regularly and perhaps being present physically constantly in Iran to monitor the purely civilian use as opposed to dual civilian military use. And I think the Israelis did not want that. So Benjamin Netanyahu did not want the talks mature. And so I think that's what he did. He thought that he had an opening, and as a pretext, the Israelis used last week the latest International Energy Agency report, and the wording of that International Energy report published 8 days ago or 9 days ago was extremely harsh. So they used very harsh language. We said the Iranians have dual use or double use nuclear facilities, blah, blah, blah. They're not abiding by the previous agreements. And I think that gave a pretext for the Israeli government, but I think Netanyahu wanted to hit brutally anyway to stop in the bud that potential deal between the Iranians and the Americans. So to make an short, here we are today, and as we say in French, it's a fait accompli. Amr waqia, fait accompli. So Israel now is dragging, in a way, America it's in its own war, even though Trump, deep in his heart, is doing it, I think, reluctantly.
Mm-hmm. Well, sir, we will talk about the U.S. being dragged into this confrontation, but the IAEA reports recently have also mentioned that maybe this damage is not that significant. It doesn't affect the nuclear capabilities. Netanyahu claims the strikes set Iran's nuclear program back significantly. So can physical damage truly halt Iran's nuclear ambitions long term, or is there the Iranian nuclear preparedness, the nuclear eggs are not all in the obvious damaged baskets?
So clearly, I think Israel has hit Iran brutally, and it didn't start 6 days ago, because let's not forget, Iran's main military assets are not its cruise missiles or its ballistic missiles or its F-16, its rusty, aging F-16 airplanes, blah, blah, blah. Iran's main military assets was the Iranian control of the Iraqi government in Baghdad directly, because the political parties which control parliament in Baghdad are all affiliated with Iran, and indirectly the influence on Lebanon through Hezbollah and the influence on the West Bank and Gaza through Hamas. So I think the Israelis already hit very hard Iranian assets in Beirut, South Lebanon, and Gaza. And today, the Iraqi government is in a very weak situation financially. So maybe these MPs and senators are less willing to obey blindly, the orders of the Iranians. So already the wings of Iran, the strategic wings, were clipped. And of course, what happened in the past 6-7 days, many senior generals and colonels and admirals in the Pasdaran, the Revolutionary Guard, and the regular Iranian armed forces, they were killed, and many missile production facilities were destroyed. But that is not enough. So because the nuclear facilities of Iran, most of them are deep down under huge mountains. Some of the biggest mountains in Central Asia are actually in Iran, and most of the nuclear facilities are 10, 20, 30,000 feet underground. So the only type of bomb which is capable of reaching that level are a monopoly of the US Air Force. So what I'm coming at, only the US Air Force owns and produces and can use potentially these gigantic bunker busters. The Israeli Air Force is brilliant, advanced, sophisticated. They have F-35, etc., but they don't have these gigantic bunker busters.
So, Mr. Fazli, I'm sorry to interrupt, but now, as you've mentioned with the assassination of these military leaders, the nuclear scientists, and you're saying that maybe these missiles and bombings do not really affect the nuclear prowess of Iran. So what's really Israel's aim? Deterrence, disruption, or regime destabilization? The Economist suggested that this can only delay the inevitable, which is a nuclear confrontation. What's your take on that?
So my take on that is Israel's gamble is to drag America into the war. That would be for them, for the Israelis, that would be an ideal scenario. Get someone else to do your work for you. And so that's the ideal scenario. And initially, America was very reluctant for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And there's one more reason. The Trump White House being led by neo-realist thinkers. These people believe that America should focus relentlessly on the Asia-Pacific area and focus only on the techno-industrial race with China. And so for them, the defense of Israel, the Middle East, Europe, Ukraine, all that is less important. Mm-hmm. And Netanyahu knows that. So as time goes by, as America becomes more and more neo-realist, less and less neoconservative, as America focuses more on Asia and China and domestically on a form of economic nationalism at home, America is going to neglect and forget about, its love or friendship or alliance with Israel, etc., just like they forgot about NATO and Western Europe, right? And so Netanyahu was afraid of that, and he was afraid of the Americans reaching a deal with the Iranians, and he gambled on hitting Iran to make the situation much worse.
Yes.
And of course, today it is much worse, sadly. And so he's gambling again on bringing America on board. It is not sure that America will go all the way, but it is now a possibility. Mm-hmm. Some may say a likelihood.
Yes. Well, Mr. Fazli, one last question for this segment. Now you're saying that Israel wants to drag the U.S. into it. Washington endorses the Israeli attacks on Iran. The European Union is calling for de-escalation, so there seems to be some division on the Western Front. How do you think this will translate into international diplomacy? Do you see as well China and Russia being dragged into the equation if the U.S. is dragged into the confrontation?
Things here, it's a great question. And here, it's a fantastic question, and things are not what they seem. So that very harsh International Energy Agency report published 9 days ago, which Israel then used as a pretext to hit Iran. Who wrote the report? Well, they were essentially German, British, French, Dutch experts. So here, whatever Europe does say, these experts, they work for the government. So they are German government experts, French government experts, and they chose deliberately to use excessively harsh language to put pressure on Europe. European government nuclear expert did that 9 days ago, not Trump, not America. Then let's look at Europe. Let's look at the European Commission, which is the federal government of Europe. The foreign minister, the EU commissioner for foreign affairs, Kaja Kallas, she's a right-wing neocon herself. So Kaja Kallas is actually the foreign minister of the EU, is actually close not only to Israel, she's close to the right wing of the ruling party in Israel. The new German chancellor, Friedrich Merz, is also a right-wing neoconservative and a friend of the Israeli far right, not the right. The Israeli far right today is supported by many people inside the EU Commission and the German government. So here again, I doubt sincerely, I'm skeptical about Europe's love of peace, because in reality, Europe is much more anti-Iranian, and Europe is also much more anti-Arab and pro-Likud, quote unquote, than America. America today, you don't have the neoconservative influence which you had in the past. Today, most neoconservatives are actually in power in Germany, inside the EU Commission, in Israel, and these guys, they won the war. So America today is a force for peace. As strange, I know it sounds like a paradox. It sounds very strange because in the Gaza crisis, America has sided with Israel, but it doesn't mean that they are siding with Israel blindly when it comes to the Arabian-Persian Gulf. I think in the Arabian-Persian Gulf, America would like to follow a cautious path. And if Iran, tomorrow or tonight, if they make the right kind of concessions, not to Israel, the right kind of concessions to Washington, I think Trump is the only one today who can force the hand of the Israelis and stop the war immediately. Europe doesn't have the power, and Europe doesn't have the will.
Yes. Mr. Fazli, please stay with us. We have more questions coming your way. Ladies and gentlemen, as one strike reshapes the region, the balance of power and of perception is shifting fast. But Israel's campaign didn't stop at Natanz. In the second segment, we will examine the political architect behind this war and whether his vision for Israel is leading the country into an endless conflict. He was there in the 1980s lobbying for Iran to get US arms. He pushed for the Iraq war in 2003. He warned against Iran's nuclear ambitions for decades. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu has delivered one of the most consequential strikes in modern Middle Eastern history. But the Financial Times challenges us to look past the immediate headlines. He's good at starting wars, it writes, but it's ending them that matters. Netanyahu's pattern has been one of tactical brilliance and strategic blindness. From Gaza to Lebanon, from Syria to Iran, each military campaign leaves destruction in its wake, but no diplomatic roadmap forward. The most damning irony, Netanyahu once funded Hamas to weaken the Palestinian Authority. Now, as he wages war against Iran, he's repeating that logic, weakening adversaries to avoid peace talks, reinforcing enemies to justify endless war. The question's no longer about battlefield victories. It's about whether Israel's long-term security can survive Netanyahu's worldview. We are back with Mr. Meher Nicola Fazli to discuss Netanyahu's regional legacy and strategic mindset. Mr. Fursley, looking at Netanyahu's track record from the 2003 Iraq War to the October 7th aftermath, do you believe he has a coherent regional strategy or just a pattern of escalation?
Yeah, so first, a short disclaimer. So I'm not going to defend Netanyahu, and I'm going to try to look at things in a very cold neo-realist way. So not being for him, not being against him, trying to look at things in a cold Machiavellian strategic way, the neo-realist school. So of course, Netanyahu is a cold animal. He's a cold-blooded operator, and his enemies inside Israel and outside Israel accuse him of being Machiavellian, etc. And clearly, the Financial Times and the Economist magazine hate him, which is a paradox because you could say, to make a long story short, that the foreign policy stance of the Economist magazine and the Financial Times in London is slightly pro-Israeli, so slightly anti-Palestinian, if you want. But at the same time, they are anti-Netanyahu. So they think in London and Paris and Brussels, these enlightened European intellectuals, that because they are pro-Israeli, they think they know what's good for Israel. And what I'm coming at, they tend to support Netanyahu's rivals in Israel, which would be, the Kadima center-right party, and Labour, the center-left, because these parties, Kadima and the center-left Labour, they remind them of the enlightened, proper kind of, governing party they have in London, Paris, and Berlin, etc.
Mm-hmm. Well, sir, critics are saying that Netanyahu is actually mimicking Iran's tactics, destabilizing neighbors, empowering militias, ignoring diplomacy. Would you say that that's a fair comparison?
It's a cruel. I would agree with that statement to a certain extent, and it's a cruel irony. And as you said earlier, Hamas was for more than 20 years armed and trained and equipped by Israel. Why? Because they wanted to weaken the PLO, and the PLO and the Palestinian National Movement was a very secular movement. Let's not forget, 60%, it's a lot, 60% of the leaders of the Palestinian nationalist movement for 50 years were actually Christian, Greek Orthodox, Greek Catholic Christian, a minority. So it was very much a secular, non-religious movement. And Israel and people like Netanyahu and his mentors would be Yitzhak Shamir and Menachem Begin, they decided to grow Hamas to hit the PLO. And they did the same in Iraq, because they hated Arab nationalism, and because Baghdad under Saddam Hussein was the leading Arab nationalist country. What did people like Yitzhak Shamir and Netanyahu do? They helped Iran. So, from Iran Gate to the illegal invasion of Baghdad in 2003, people like Netanyahu, the Likud party, they funded and armed and equipped the Iranian Pasdaran to hit Iraq. So what I'm coming at, yes, in a very brutally cynical way, you could say that Netanyahu is playing dirty, and the Iranians also are playing dirty. So in a way, they are ideal partners.
Yes.
Because the Iranian regime, just like the Likud party,
Mr. Fursley, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have 1 minute, but I have two questions that I need to ask pretty quick. So Arab states such as the UAE and Saudi Arabia are calling for de-escalation. Has Netanyahu lost the regional momentum that once enabled the Abraham Accords?
Yes, you could say that he lost it, but and very briefly, the strategic value of the Abraham Accord in the eyes of the ruling elite in Israel is less than it was 5-6 years ago. So this is the reality today.
Okay, so finally, where does this leave Israel for the long term? Is Netanyahu safeguarding the future, or is he scripting a dangerous new chapter of isolation and an endless conflict?
I think he's going all the way along a certain strategic path, which you could say is rooted in the thinking of his own father, who was a brilliant academic and historian, Benzion Netanyahu, and the founding father of the Likud party, Vladimir Jabotinsky. So that past is really ultranationalism, you could say cynicism, and the idea that they believe it's impossible to make peace with their neighbors, and they believe that the only language people understand in the Middle East, quote unquote, according to them, is brutal force. So they are using the textbook, they're using the ideological textbook of the Likud party to the full, and they're doing it in a decomplexed way because Israel today is relatively stronger than it was 10, 20 years ago. Its neighbors are weaker than they were 20, 30 years ago.
Mr. Meher Nicola Fursley, thank you very much for joining us across both segments of tonight's episodes. Your insights shed light on our story today. Now, the shockwaves of Israel's offensive may linger long after the last missile lands. As the fog of war thickens, one question cuts through the noise. Is Netanyahu defending his nation or defining it by war? From Tehran's ruins to Washington's back channels, the Middle East is entering a dangerous new era, one in which strength may no longer bring safety and gambles may only deepen the void. I'm Henny Seif, and that was In Focus.